We're continuing our series in Galatians, glimpsing the gospel in Galatians, and we're in chapter 1, verses 11 to 24, which you'll see on the screen. The bits in orange are where I've taken the Greek and just given you the other translations that you could see there. I want you to know, says Paul, let me make it clear to you, I would have you know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted, ravaged the church of God, and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people, and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia. Later I returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted, to inquire of Cephas, that's Aramaic for Peter, one of the disciples of Jesus, and stayed with him 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. I assure you before God that what I am writing you is no lie. Then I went to Syria and Cilicia. I was personally unknown to the churches in Judea, but that are in Christ. They only heard the report. The man who formerly persecuted us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy, and they praised God because of me. Let's watch the screen together. The wizard is revealed there, and he's not what he's made out to be, far less impressive. In our first 2 verses of this passage, Paul makes it clear that the revealing of the gospel to him came from God. It didn't come from other people. It didn't come from him learning it. He says the revelation of the gospel came to him. Revelation there means to unveil something, to pull back the curtain and see what is really behind it. It's not that 19th and 20th century understanding of revelation talking about the end times. That's not what Paul is talking about here. Tom Wright says, something out of sight that suddenly becomes visible. That's what revelation means. When something hidden behind a screen is suddenly revealed. Paul's story focuses on a moment when the Jesus who is already enthroned in heaven suddenly became visible to his naked eye on earth. A moment when God's future arrived in the present, so that now, from Paul's point of view, it is a past event through which everything has changed. Basically, what Tom Wright is saying there is, Paul sees Jesus and his life is changed by that revealing. This is no Wizard of Oz. You don't deliver what you say. This is the Son of the living God who changes lives. You'll see that I'm more relaxed today. The Tonbridge Angels season finished yesterday, where I'm club chaplain. I get to rest from that for a couple of months before I go back to it. I get to go to training as well as the matches, and always at the beginning of training we have video analysis where the manager goes through with the players what we did well and what we could have improved from last week and what the team we're going to play next week are like. And in the analysis a couple of weeks ago, he talked with them and he said he always likes to get them involved, but they're young men and they're strong and they don't want to look stupid. And he said to them, when you get the ball, I want you to cross it, and I want you to cross it between the goalkeeper and the defenders in the corridor of... And they all sat there quietly, these 24 young men, and I knew the answer, and I knew. And so I said to him, the corridor of indecision. You can see on the graph up here that there's the corridor, that yellow bit. That's where he wants them to play it. Now, our manager, Alan Dunn, played nearly 400 times for Millwall, which are not the friendliest club in the leagues. He got 11 red cards for them, their club record. And if you look on the internet, he is rated as the 3rd nastiest Irish football player ever to exist. I said to him, it's the corridor of indecision. And he looked at me and went, no, Neil, it's the corridor of uncertainty. And as he said that, all the players began to laugh at me. And I thought, I think you're right, but I think actually I'm right. And so I said, no, Dunny, it's the corridor of indecision. And as I was saying it, I was thinking, I know I'm wrong. Why am I still speaking to this person who was a professional footballer, went to Wembley 7 times, has had, more importantly, 11 red cards. And he came over and he stood in front of me and he said, Neil, I love your involvement, but you're wrong. It's the corridor of uncertainty. I said, OK, Dunny, maybe you're right. Why can't we just admit we're wrong sometimes? Even when we know we are. It's so hard to back down, isn't it? We live in a culture where the climate makes it hard to admit we're wrong. Everybody's looking for somebody to pin the blame on. Look at the political world that we live in the East and the West nowadays. Everybody is looking for someone else to blame for a decision that was made. So that somebody down there gets fired, but not the guy, generally guy, at the top. Why is it so hard to admit we're wrong? Because of the shame that we feel. We live in an education system, I would suggest, that in many ways is wonderful. But it's one where the things we study to explore and have wonder, like art and music and craft and design, are subservient to English and maths and the sciences, which are all about being right or wrong. And so we live in a cultural education system that is about learning to be right. And that can dribble into the church. And the church, if we're not careful, can just be about being right and sorting out who's wrong. And the wonder and the mystery and the exploration just gets put to one side. We live in a culture where it's hard to admit we're wrong because of a lack of forgiveness. Who are you, think for a moment, holding unforgiveness towards? And you've tried to forgive. And so you think, I better not admit I'm wrong, because they might treat me like I have treated others. It's hard in our culture to admit we're wrong. Our default seems to be that we expect people are not telling the truth. Read the headlines. Is it real? Are they massaging it, or are they just telling an outright lie that one day will bubble up and we see it's not true? It's hard to admit we're wrong. There's a desire for revenge wrapped in the words of justice, but actually I want to get even with you. Paul admits he's wrong. There's no hiding with Paul. His previous way of life, when he was called Saul, he puts it out there in this passage, and he says, I was wrong. As I read that, it makes me feel hopeful. That maybe there is a slight slither of forgiveness in the church. In fact, maybe a massive wodge of forgiveness. In fact, maybe a whole cake of forgiveness where we can say, I'm wrong and I've repented and God's forgiven me and will you welcome me? I'm not sidestepping justice there. Sometimes things are done and ramifications need to be seen through in the courts of law, in the lines of justice, whatever they may be. I completely get that. But this must be a safe place where we can say, I've got it wrong. In verses 13 and 14, Paul says, for you've heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted, ravaged the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my father. He wasn't just writing a strongly worded email in capital bold red letters. He was trying to destroy the church. Destroy it. You ever pull down an old rotten shed in your garden? You don't do it gently, do you? You're getting rid of the thing. The wood's rotten. The windows are damaged. It leaks. You rip it down. You let your kids get a sledgehammer and smash it to bits, because usually we don't destroy stuff. We put it in the loft, don't we? Or that room in our house that no guest is allowed to go in. If you open that door, you will be crushed. Destroy the shed and then burn it, so that nothing exists apart from a photo that we put on Facebook to remind ourselves of it. Paul says he was advancing in Judaism. Friends, we shouldn't confuse Judaism with religion. Judaism wasn't a religion at the time of Paul compared to Christianity. Paul did not convert from Judaism to Christianity. It wasn't moving from one religion to another. I know in some Christian circles that's how we've sold it, but I just don't think it's true. Judaism at the time of Paul was a way of life. It infiltrated everything you did. And so they basically just believed that you either followed God, which means you followed the ways of Judaism, or you were not following God. And so the zealous people, that's the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, made it their business to impress on Jews the way of life that was Judaism and to keep them away from the pagans. And the pagans included Christians, because Christianity wasn't the way of life that the Jews believed they should follow. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? To three people, that makes sense. Yeah, because I had to get my head around that the last couple of weeks. Because I always thought, oh, Paul falls off his horse or whatever, and he thinks, I'm going to ditch that religion, I'm going to grab that one. No. Paul is in a way of life that everything is a part of. In 1 Maccabees, the first 2 chapters, that's a book between the Old and the New Testament that isn't in the Bible, but is historically correct. We see the rebellion of Mattathias and his sons against the actions of the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes. He'd put some cults, some pictures in the temple in Jerusalem for people to worship. And if you know Judaism, that way of life, there is no visible emblem of God anywhere. And to put them in the temple was this foreign pagan king really pushing the limits. And so they had a war with him. And in Mattathias' speech, he speaks of the long history of covenant heroes. And he goes back to Abraham, who defended the traditions that they stood for. And then he talks about how God had used Phinehas in Numbers 25 and Elijah in 1 Kings 18. And that they had stood against these pagan people and they had used prayer and violence to stop the bad things happening. This is exactly what Paul is doing in the book of Acts that he alludes to here in Galatians. He is standing up for a way of life, and he will use prayer and he will use violence to stop that way of life. He draws a line. One writer says zeal meant the toxic combination of serious prayer and, where necessary, serious violence, designed to purge the Jewish world of blasphemous wickedness. In Saul's case, of the nonsense of a crucified Messiah. The message of Jesus was a scandal to the Jews. And Paul looks back at his life and shows the false apostles that he's writing against here in Galatians that he understands where they're coming from. I understand why you're trying to introduce these religious laws to Christianity. I get it. I was there and then some. He was zealous beyond most in his own age group, he says. He was at the forefront of the persecution of Christianity. We see it in the stoning of Stephen in Acts chapter 7 and 8. Paul had gone with a letter from Jerusalem saying he could destroy the churches. And the people gathered around Stephen, one of the first Christians, and they were stoning him. And when they began to stone him, they went and they laid their cloaks at the feet of Saul, who became Paul. Why did they lay their cloaks at his feet? Because probably like today, it was a sunny, hot day. And more sun in their area of the world. And if you're going to stone someone, it takes a long time. You might hurt them a bit to begin with. You might break a few bones. You might get a good boulder on their head and make them unconscious, but you can't guarantee that they're dead yet. You have got to put some effort and force into stoning someone. You've got to really hurl those boulders. Make sure that you get them in the right place. It takes a long time. So you don't want a cloak on, building up sweat, getting it dirty so that when you take it home, you have to wash it. They laid their cloaks at the feet of Saul, and it says in Acts chapter 1 that Saul stood there observing and giving his approval. This is his story that he does not hide from. A previous Angels manager messaged me this week and he said, "You'll be proud of me, Neil." I said, "Why, Jay?" He said, we've been to Seville, me and my girlfriend, and we went to the cathedral. It is absolutely stunning and incredible. I went back to him and said, why are you on your phone in a cathedral? Can you not do football business outside of it? And he said, oh no, that was the guided tour. They put it on your phone now. I went, all right, I forgive you. Not that I had anything to forgive him for, but I felt I should forgive him anyway. And he said, I've got a question. He said, there was a beautiful painting there, and it was a painting of Mary, pregnant, on a donkey, coming to Seville. And in the painting, loads of Seville people are touching her stomach to receive a blessing. Neil, did that happen? And I chuckled a bit like some of you did. But my immediate next reaction was, why do we make it complicated for people to meet Jesus? Why do we put in loads of baloney, I think that's a theological word, that gets in the way for them? So that somebody who is sniffing around the fringes of faith and goes into a cathedral that he doesn't need to go into gets sidetracked by a painting that is historically completely rubbish. I said to him, no, Jay, that's just rubbish. It's folklore. He said, oh, I thought that it was. Can I use this in the sermon? Yeah, of course you can. Paul continues and says, but when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, that might be painful us, that first bit. God who set me apart in my mother's womb. Not a womb in a fake painting that's being touched in Seville, but maybe some of us here or online have lost babies, and we didn't feel we could really talk about it. Or maybe we decided and made a decision about that baby in our womb, and we've not talked about it. And so when we read those words in Scripture that can be so blithely read out, we think, what about the child that was in my womb? What about the fear I have for them, the frustration, the guilt? And I, as a man who do not understand these things, I want to say that I believe each of those children are in the near presence of Jesus. They are held by him more closely than I held Matilda here at the front earlier. They are known by him. Their story that does not unplay in our time plays out in eternity. And God does not look at us in wrathful judgment, but in redeeming and redemptive love. And if that strikes a nerve with you, please do talk with somebody later, because we can carry these things unseen, and they can hamper us when God would not want that. But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went to Arabia. Later I returned to Damascus. In talking about being known in the womb, Paul is saying that he is in the line of the prophets, because Jeremiah in chapter 1 verses 4 and 5 says that he was formed in his womb and chosen by God. Isaiah speaks of the suffering servant that was sometimes the people of Israel and sometimes Isaiah himself, and he says that God chose him from the womb and he named him and he gave him a calling. Paul is saying, I come from a rich stock of the people of Judaism, a way of life, who from the womb were called by God. And then he goes to Arabia, where there is Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments from God. What have you done in the last 3 years of your life? Just think for a moment. Close your eyes without falling asleep. What have you done since 2023? Some of us thinking, I don't know. It's just all blurred into one big thing with 3 Christmases with family I don't really get on with. But I got through it and I'm here. And some of us remember something, don't we? The birth of a child, death of a loved one. One of our families saying, I've placed my trust in Jesus. Sacking from a job, promotion at work. What have you done in the last 15 days? Close your eyes again if you're able without falling asleep. What have you done in the last 15 days? Time's a funny thing, isn't it? Time's a funny thing. Paul carries on in the passage and says, then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted, inquire of Peter, and stayed with him 15 days. Can we just pause there? He became a Christian. This is a celebrity Christian. He's just done I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of There, the special one in South Africa. And then he goes away for 3 years. And he's around no one. And then he comes back, and for 15 days, he's with Peter. And he says, I saw none of the others. Oh, only James, the Lord's brother. And I'm thinking, you forgot James, the Lord's brother. You've met one of Jesus' brothers, and you're trying to not lie and remember the details. And you forget that. But I get it. He's not bothered about that because he's met Jesus. I've met Jesus. So actually seeing his brother is kind of second rate. Sometimes, in my experience, we can rush celebrity Christians into the limelight. Think of some TV personalities that have come to faith, been shunted onto TV programmes and podcasts, and then it falls apart. Maybe it was wise that Paul spent 3 years just away from people and secluded on the fringes. Wonder what they talked about for those 15 days as he met with Peter, and James, Jesus' brother. What grabbed me in this passage of Scripture is one line from verses 15 and 16. Paul says, God was pleased to reveal his Son in me. In me. And I thought, but the way we say is, God was pleased to reveal his Son to me. That's how I would write it. Not in me, but to me. Paul says here, Jesus was already in me. We need to beware of Paul on the road to Damascus being converted. That's not what happened. What happened to Paul was he was following the way of life, Judaism, and he was waiting for the Messiah of God to come, and he couldn't see the Messiah of God in the person hanging on a cross, and so he just deleted it. But he still looked for the Messiah, and on the road to Damascus, Jesus appeared to him. So the one that he'd always been looking for was there for him, but also in him from before eternity. Jesus was in Paul, this one who stood by the cloaks of Saul when Stephen was stoned. Jesus was in him then, at that depraved level of violence and religious persecution. Jesus was in him, and he was revealed to him. Does Paul capture both conversion experiences if we understand this properly? Was he continuing in the tradition that he grew up in, and Jesus was revealed in him and it just made sense? As well as that dramatic, life-changing moment. He continued in that tradition that he'd grown up in. At my last church, we had a lady in her early 20s, and she said to me, Neil, I can't get baptised. I said, why can't you get baptised? And she said, because I've never had that dramatic moment with God. I've grown up in a Christian home. I've always known that God's loved me. And so I've not got a story to tell. I said, that's your story to tell. That you've always known the love of God. And that now he's just revealing to you in a more concrete way. That's the traditional way that Paul grew up in. And also there's that dramatic, life-changing way in Paul. Sir Kenneth Robinson wrote, not far from where I live is a place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest, driest place in America, and nothing grows there. Nothing grows there because it doesn't rain, hence Death Valley. In the winter of 2004, it rained in Death Valley. 7 inches of rain fell over a very short period. And in the spring of 2005, there was a phenomenon. The whole floor of Death Valley was carpeted in flowers for a while. What it proved is this, that Death Valley isn't dead. It's dormant. Right beneath the surface are these seeds of possibility waiting for the right conditions to come about. And as you look at your loved ones who you think they're dead to faith, that there's nothing going on there, who you've prayed for decades, could it be that they're not dead in faith? Their faith is just dormant because Jesus is in them? Can we believe in a God who is so loving and gracious that he has planted the seed of Jesus in every human being, the image of God we would call it? That one day, with the right conditions and rain, it will flourish and grow. Dr. Paul Tripp said this, "No one is more influential in your life than you, because no one talks to you more than you do. You are an unending conversation with yourself. You are talking to yourself all the time, interpreting, organising and analysing what's going on inside you and around you. When do you regularly tell yourself about yourself, God, and your circumstances? Do your words to yourself encourage faith, hope, and courage? Or do they stimulate doubt, discouragement, and fear?" Here's the question. How wholesome, faith-driven, and Christ-centred is the conversation that you have with yourself every day? How well are you counselling yourself? Do we tell ourselves, I've got a backstory like Paul's and I want to keep it hidden because there's no way God would love and accept me? Do we say, my kids are far from God and I can't see them ever coming towards him? Or do we say, I've got a backstory that's forgiven, cleansed, washed clean, and I don't need to hide it or be ashamed of it. And I believe that Jesus is in my loved ones who haven't accepted him yet, who've wandered from him, and that with the right conditions, he will be revealed to them and change their lives. Paul says in one of his other letters, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you. And Christ in the ones who haven't said yes to him yet. Amen?